that happy medium of controlling traction, controlling your speed, but also maintaining speed. Because ultimately, if you can maintain speed through corners, you're going to beat your friends, and that's always good. And B, it's more efficient. That's the flow state. That's where that cool feeling of doing a corner and being like, oh my God, that felt awesome. Anytime it felt awesome is because you maintain speed and you're not having to pedal to get up to speed or pump madly or whatever it is. It's that feeling of, oh my God, I railed that corner. So braking is one of the tools that we can do to hopefully get that rad feeling through the corners.
3, 2, 1, 0, 0, and liftoff.
Welcome to Donuts and Bikes, the mountain bike coaching podcast. Your hosts are Paul Howard and me, Kristian Jackson, and we're here to discuss the skills, techniques, and tactics we've used to train and mentor the riders and coaches we've worked with over the last 20 years. In this episode, we are digging into how we can use braking and corners to get that rad feeling we all look for. Hey, Paul. It's good to be back on the mic consistently for season 4. Really enjoyed this, the repetition of being on the mic and talking through all of our topics. And it's good to see you more too.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, it's been fun. And I kind of was laughing the other day because it's like probably busier than ever right now, but somehow we're making the podcast happen, and it's, busy people do other people that do all the things. So I'm super grateful that we can do this because it's so much fun. It's awesome, and trying to figure out coaching and in this different medium of podcasts and talking about it's a ton of fun. So yeah, man, great to be doing this. And I think it's a good reminder for me. It's like, as busy as you get, you still got to take time out to do the things that you want to do and not that you have to do. In the end of the day, it's good for your mental health and keep the positivity going.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is go season for coaching, getting ready for the summer. So training, certifications. We got to spend some good time together a few weeks ago in the Brevard area, riding some sick trails. And yeah, now we're back in season 4, and just want to give a shout out to our new sponsors, Suga here in Boone, manufacturers of really cool, unique mountain bike gear, especially hip packs and all sorts of little accessories made here in town.
I really liked that when I was at yours a couple of weeks ago, that mat that you gave me just to sit.
The mud mat.
The mud mat, yeah, just to sit on that was such a cool idea, or to get changed on in the car park. Or just to stash your clothes in. That was I was like, man, this is sweet. I want one of these. Yeah,
it stays in my truck. It's great. Came from the idea of Jimmy Combs, the owner of Suga, was a climber first and worked at a local climbing gear manufacturing company. They made what they called scratch pads for bouldering, for wiping your feet off.
Yeah.
And then he transitioned that into the mud mat, where it's like this bifold piece of equipment. It's really, really cool. All made here in Boone. It's great. And then Local Lion is partnering with us. Boone's first donut shop, which is really rad. They've been around for almost 15 years now.
Oh, cool.
And is that long? It's been a long time. Amazing donuts. They've got a recipe from the 1930s that was award-winning, kind of a mysterious find. Maybe we'll unpack that in a future episode. But
wow.
Yeah, really cool donuts and great coffee. And then, for our listeners, if you want to support us, you can check out our Patreon on our website. It's a way to help us continue to do what we do and to grow this podcast into something that we can all benefit from. That's why Paul and I are really motivated for this, not just for the creative journey for ourselves, but to really try to grow the coaching community worldwide, globally.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think Yeah, I think it's good to just quickly touch on that too, because people, when you hear sponsors, people think, oh, you're making money and stuff, but it costs quite a lot of money to run the podcast. So, really the sponsorship money is helping us just cover those costs, but also like we are looking to travel to interview riders and to really sort of step this up a game, and so just being able to have a bit of budget to pay for flights or pay for riders to come see us, or whatever the situation is, it's that sort of sponsorship money is that's kind of our plan. Big long term is just trying to make it cost neutral essentially, because we are taking a fair bit of time out of our work and our personal lives to do it, because like we've always said, it is a passion project. So yeah, having a few sponsors come on board, it really just helps it make sense a little bit more in that way. And like always, it's just cool to work with cool brands and help them out if they're helping us out. And yeah, it's good times.
Cool. I've noticed in our conversations recently, the theme of strength keeps coming back up.
Yeah.
Have you done your calisthenics this morning?
I did, yeah. And I was moaning at breakfast because I was like, push-ups are really hard.
They get easier. It's one of those things that get easier, right?
Yeah. Well, my goal this week is like not too worried about the actual training I'm doing. It's just I'm trying to just form the habit first of setting the alarm, getting up early, working out before breakfast. So it's like step one is form the habit, and then step two is improve the habit. So at the moment, I'm just trying to form the habit of getting up early and going downstairs and working out a bit.
In some ways that in itself is the hardest part. Just making the decision to do it, and then just putting your foot on the floor and making it happen.
Yeah, and that's what I've like noticed. How I failed in the past is I've tried to, if I haven't done the workout really well, then I'm like, oh, this isn't work, it's not worth it. But it's like, yeah, it's just being kind to yourself, I guess, and just taking it progressively. And you can't get good at the workout until you just start working out, I guess, is sort of my logic this time. It's like I want this to be a permanent change in my routine. And so long term, if I spend 2 weeks doing kind of crappy workouts, I don't care. But if those 2 weeks just start building the habit, then yeah, that's my logic anyway. We'll see. I'll tell you in 2 weeks if I'm still working out or not. But we'll give it a go.
Let me ask you this. What's your motivation for working out?
Well, it's nothing too crazy. I do want to get stronger. I think the strength holds me back on my bike, and the fitness holds me back more than most things. And I know when I have been stronger and fitter, like my confidence, because the two biggest things that hold me back are my head and my body. I don't think it's my skill per se. Like I think my skill is beyond my head and my body. So yeah, I just want to get stronger and fitter, and we're not getting any younger too, right? So it's all part of it. I want to keep doing this for another 20 years. So I just can't have the same routine that I had when I was 25 or 30. Like I'm 46 now. So I've got to start behaving like a 46-year-old and not like a 26-year-old and actually work out. Because I think that's the bad side to, like, if you grow up with that natural fitness, which I generally have always had, but the last 10 years or so, it's just that natural fitness definitely hasn't been the same. And having never had to work for my fitness, I'm now sort of reluctantly realizing that I can't just be fit anymore. If I sit around, I put on weight, and that's never happened in my life ever. So, just got to accept it and start acting like I'm 46 and not pretending that I'll just be fine.
Right.
Yeah, I think similar to probably a ton of people that are listening to, right? Like, yeah, just got to accept it and do the work and stop scrolling Instagram looking for easy fixes. You just got to commit, do the work, and get it done. So I'm trying to sort of listen to my own advice and do it.
I love that idea of building the habit first. Mm.
Yeah.
Like you're building walls, before you're deciding on furniture.
Yeah.
So, and then
Yeah.
hopefully we'll make it easier for
Yeah.
sure.
And then I'm doing like Monday, Tuesday, day off, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because I feel like you can do most things 2 days in a row. And then, so if I do Monday, Tuesday, day off, Wednesday, Thursday, weekend off. So really, I just have to do it 2 days in a row, and then I'm good. So I don't know. Like I say, we'll see. See
Awesome.
how it goes.
I think talking about strength really makes me remember the performance factors episode,
Yeah,
and I think this is a very conceptual episode,
yeah,
and kind of talking through all those pieces from this unique idea of like how do the performance factors vary from a regular Joe rider to a pro rider.
yeah,
And if you haven't listened to that episode, folks, go check that out. Great conversation there. And we started off that conversation talking about performance and defining performance. And for this episode, which we're titling "Why You Should Break in Corners," um, I had an idea of just revisiting this idea of performance and framing performance in addition to what we said as how closely we can align our goals with the outcome.
mm,
So thinking about goal setting in whatever we're doing on the bike, in this case, it's going to be cornering, but then how the performance that we're looking for then is how closely the goals, our goal for the corner and the outcome, what actually happens, how closely they're aligned.
yeah. I love that idea. It's if yeah, in simple terms, if your outcome is way a distance away from the goal, then chances are performance wasn't met, right? But if you can get those as close together, then really the goal is your ideal outcome. And if the actual outcome matches that, then yeah, you could be like, sweet, performance achieved, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we can fall below the goal, we can meet the goal, or we can exceed it, in
Yeah,
any
yeah,
given situation. There's three kind of options there. And so in this episode, we really want to kind of talk about the role of braking in corners and kind of dive into this. And Paul suggested this episode, and I was I've been riding a single speed a lot lately, and
mm,
this is one of the things that I've noticed is one of the main differences that's kind of taken me a while to unpack is traction
mm.
in corners and how this varies from the hardtail to regular full suspension bike. But it made me think that might be a good place to start us off with this idea of braking is really talking about traction, what it is, why we need it.
Yeah, that's cool. And so yeah, that's right. So you're riding a single speed hardtail at the moment, clipped in. Is that right?
Yeah, not all the time, but
Not all the time. Just
once a
yeah.
week, maybe twice a
When
week.
when you feel like life is too easy, you go ride that.
Yeah, exactly. Where everything's just roses and sunshine.
Everything's good. I'm totally happy. Let's go ride a really difficult bike.
It's changed my understanding of strength though for in a lot of ways. But yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
for sure.
But yeah, it's not my main bike, but it's got me thinking about skills in a different and performance factors in a different way for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I've got my Chromac hardtail. We were going to do this last summer, but we'll do it this summer. As we're going to do a little bit of a hardtail series. But getting back to traction anyway. Um, yeah, I think when you look at a corner, right, we're changing direction. So anytime you're changing direction, you're gonna need maximum grip because just that direction change is all sorts of forces are happening. The bike and the momentum, the mass is going one way, and you're trying to get it to go another way against the current forces. So grip is key. If you don't have grip, we can't change direction. Essentially, you just end up, you know. I always think like if you go as fast as you can onto an ice rink, and then try and turn, nothing's going to happen. You're just going to fall over and slide and continue going in exactly the same direction. So grip is key. And I think for cornering, you look at some of the best cornerers in the world. Cornerers? Is that a thing?
Sure.
Cornerers? Yeah, why not? The best cornerers in the world feel for grip and managing grip and the technique to kind of ensure they have grip, whether they know what they're doing or not. Like that's the one thing, or one of the outcomes I see in their riding. It's like, even when you're watching MotoGP or people like the way Jet Lawrence corners on his dirt bike and or Eli Tomac, like there's these sort of masters in each sport. I think Valley does it really well as well. And the reason why they have better cornering speed is mostly because they're able to just manage the traction and the grip. So grip for me is what is traction and what is grip. It's really the ability to get the tires to track where you want them to track and to be able to essentially avoid sliding. So whether you're braking or whether you're turning, the whole idea of grip is you have a feel, you have a technique to weight or pressure or push on the tires so that they are rolling and they're not sliding. A wheel in motion is a wheel with traction, right? And something that's locked and sliding, that's where we're losing grip. So for me, grip is all about the ability to avoid the wheel skidding or sliding, basically.
Yeah, and it's like the sense of control as a result from that, I think is an important sensation, of the outcome is that, well executed performance and braking, creating that grip then gives you that sense of control, which is going to unlock the confidence to, to further execute down the trails. Maybe you've had the experience or have riders that have the experience, Paul, of kind of losing a bit of control in a corner. And then the time that it takes to regain after that could be substantial.
Yeah, it's funny because we've had a pretty dry spring in Pemberton, and in March, April, riding was really good, like all time, conditions. And then it's actually starting to dry up already. And even just the other day, I was on a ride with Huxley, and I let him go first and then I'll catch him up. And I was like, oh my God, it's almost like loose, dry summer conditions already. And just in the last week or two, the grip has disappeared compared to earlier in the season. And yeah, for sure, your cornering speed, your confidence to just let off the brakes or lean in, like the confidence is just not the same. So yeah, as soon as traction is reduced, it impacts everything you do. Thanks for listening, everyone. Kristian and I are stoked to be doing this podcast. If you're enjoying the show and want to support us, please take a moment to share our podcast with your friends, families, colleagues, or neighbors by letting them know where they can find us and listen for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever they get their podcasts. The more love we get, the more episodes we can create. Alrighty, get back to the show.
Our topic here is why we should brake in corners. Maybe we'll talk through a couple myths about braking in corners as an entryway into this.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is I was saying the other day on the Downtime podcast, like generally speaking these days, there's fewer myths. I feel like we've busted a lot of those myths now. Like you don't lean back when you go downhill and, all these kind of crazy things and tucking your elbows in and stuff from road riding. Like generally, I think everybody has a much better understanding of how we ride bikes these days, and which is awesome. But there's still some lingering myths for sure. And even the other day, I heard this one that like don't break through corners. And I don't know if it was on the Gypsy Tales podcast, can't remember, but they were talking about like the interviewer was tell us about like not breaking through corners and letting it go. And the rider was basically yeah, for sure, there's a ton of corners where I don't break at all, but a lot of the time I have to break in the corners. So it's this is definitely one of those ones that's lingered around, that, you know, break before the corner and don't break in the corner. And whilst that's true for some corners, like we kind of always talk about in GSMBC, and, you know, mountain biking is pros and cons, not rights and wrong. It really depends on the shape, the surface, the speed, the intended outcome, your line choice through the corner. Like, there's so many variables. And, you know, back behind my house is a perfect example. There's a ton of corners where I'm braking on purpose through the corner with my front brake on, because the braking puts all my weight onto the front wheel and increases the traction. So it's actually better, smoother, faster to have a little bit of brake through the corner. So not to skip ahead too much, but yeah, just addressing this idea that essentially it's a little bit of a myth. And the classic reason too is, especially in a berm, like if you think about it, like for you, what happens on a downhill berm if you don't do any braking? Like, what are you struggling with in that scenario? If you're going pretty quick, there's a downhill berm and there's no braking, like, what do you feel through that?
You're typically struggling to manage pressure.
Yeah.
Through the centrifugal force, and then your line choice, you know, can vary.
Yeah. And I think just the simple physics of a turn, like if you push an obstacle through a radius, it will want to accelerate, because essentially the terrain, assuming there's grip, the terrain is basically suddenly pushing you into that new direction, and that force can create acceleration. So especially on a bike where in some ways you're on a frictionless object, there's a little bit of friction with the tires on the ground, but because of the wheels, the nature of a wheel, and assuming there's no real friction in the hubs, you're kind of on a frictionless object. So if you take that turn on flat terrain, but then you put it on a slight downhill gradient, the bikes will naturally want to accelerate. So if you're not ready for that, the bike's going to go ahead and you're going to get squashed into the back seat a little bit. So we're constantly fighting that acceleration, especially through downhill corners, downhill berms, any kind of banked downhill corner. So just sort of understanding all these different variables, different terrain, different gradients, different surface. Is it banked corner? Is it flat corner? We're going to start finding a lot of scenarios where actually breaking into and through the corner is more effective than just the old school, you know, don't break through the corners. If you're breaking through the corners, you're doing it wrong kind of thing.
Interesting slight tangent here is the idea that a lot of the trails that we ride today, really modern, well-built mountain bike trails, the designer and the builder have thought through these ideas for corners and are, you know, creating designs where the terrain itself is actually going to slow you down before you come into a turn, like on a modern flow trail. And so it's kind of interesting to think about, you know, like if you're just riding flow trails, like the concept of braking might not resonate, and you might not be able to develop this skill because the trail itself has been built to minimize braking.
Yeah.
Which to me, you know, taking on and off the two different hats that I kind of have as a coach and then a trail person, you know, like you really need, as a rider and a coach, you need to be seeking out lots of different kinds of trails. Because, you know, just riding modern trails that are designed for this, it's, we don't need to brake as much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how many times I've done braking lesson in a bike park, and then you kind of, you know, your little spiel, your demo, whatever it is, and you head down the trail, and then everybody follows you, and then you stop after a while and you're like, okay, so shoot, we didn't really need to break down there at all.
Right.
You know, we need to go find a more technical trail where we actually have to brake. Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you. And in a part, I love that because um, the whole kind of idea of flow state is essentially a consistent speed. And ideally, if the terrain can manage our speed and we've got minimal break in, like that's where a rider can really get into that flow state, and hence the term, flow trails. But um, lots of different ways to enjoy riding bikes. So um, yeah, it's I really like that idea, and I think a good trail design does have that. It has that sort of, if there's a downhill right hand berm, the entrance of the berm, the trail might curve slightly up to the left,
Yeah,
just to slow you down, and then at the exit of the berm, it will kind of overturn a little bit and even slightly turn back up the hill a tiny bit because they know the rider's going to accelerate through the turn. And essentially, that's just smarter trail building, apart from anything else, because there's less wear and tear. Because we all know brakes rip up trails, right, and cause all the braking bumps and stuff. So it's really cool to ride. It's more flowy, but it's a more sustainable way to build trails too.
for sure. Well, let's get into some of the hows here with breaking through the corners. Well, maybe before we do that, not breaking in the turn is a myth. Um, but there's also a bit of a myth of trying to break before the turn to get, do most of your turn braking before the turn. Or have you heard that in your circles?
Yeah, and I think we often talk about more or less braking rather than breaking and not breaking. So just add a bit of quantity to it. But I mean, generally speaking, if you go back to traction, we want maximum contact patch of the tire on the ground, and we want sort of the big meaty tire knobs working for us when we're braking. And we want to try and control forces in one plane, right? So if we're going straight and we're braking, the bike is sort of upright, perpendicular to the terrain. And if we put on the anchors, we're essentially just controlling forces fore and aft. So it's easier as a rider to kind of maintain our position, control those forces, resist the forces. But then from the tire's perspective, the tire is only having to deal with essentially a fore aft kind of energy force through the tire, right, as you're slowing down. So the tire is in a good position to handle with the grip, and then the rider is in a good place to sort of just deal with forces in that kind of fore aft front to back plane. So it does make sense, and then we all know that steering under braking can arguably be more difficult because we're braking, we're tensing up as a rider because we want to brace as we brake, so our body doesn't flop forward. It stays in a good place on the bike. So logic tells us that, yeah, generally speaking, if we're braking and we're heavy braking, we want to just do it in a straight line. And then if we're turning, and now we're dealing with sort of lateral forces, rotational forces, fore and aft forces, we're dealing with all of these forces. So it makes sense if the brakes are off, we're going to have more traction on the tires, arguably because we're not resisting any momentum, and a rolling tire has more grip. And as we spoke about before, a sliding or skidding tire is less grip. So if we're not braking, we're going to make sure that the tires are rolling, we've got grip, and then it's easier as a body. If we're not braking, we're more relaxed, so we can lean the bike, we can rotate, we can do all of the other movements we need to do to deal with fore aft lateral rotational kind of planes that's happening as soon as you start turning and changing direction. So it does make sense generally, more braking before, less braking during, but I guess on the flip side, it's like that's where we can get into the when piece, the timing piece, because does that mean as soon as you start to turn, the brakes have to be off, or is it just both brakes have to be off, or one brake has to be off? So how much freedom does a rider have to adjust that timing of when do they do more of the braking and when do they do less of the braking? And when's that transition? Is it before the corner, in the corner, before the apex? Is it at the exit of the corner? So yeah, the timing piece is a lot more nuanced, and I think that's where there can be a little bit of a myth of you always brake before and you um, always try and release the brake through the corner. And that's, whilst that's true for a lot of corners, there's just too many variables in mountain biking for that to be a hard and fast rule that you apply all the time.
For sure. And I think on the flip side of myths, maybe there's the concept of often riders not being aware of when they're braking
Yeah.
and defaulting to dragging the brakes when they're going downhill and not, just as a default mechanism of this is how I go downhill, and not being aware of I need to brake more here at this point or less here at this point.
Yeah, that's really popular, or really common rather. Like they essentially they're just not being purposeful about it, and they don't have the awareness to be selective, and they're not actively sort of choosing, okay, where's my braking zones? Essentially, braking just boils down to braking zones. Here's where I want to do more braking. Here's where I want to do less braking. And it's just being mindful and purposeful about that selection, basically.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Paul and I get a lot out of this project, and we hope you do too. If you'd like to help us grow this show, check out our Patreon. By becoming a supporter, you can help us cover the cost of the show, as well as help us make this an exceptional show with great topics and insightful guests. You can find a link on our website, the mountainbikecoachingpodcast.buzzsprout.com. Thanks, and let's get back to the show. For me, this goes back to, kind of ties back to goal setting. If you're thinking about a rider and coaching a rider to be better at braking, like what is the goal that they're trying to achieve in their riding? Are they trying to become a racer, or are they racing, trying to get faster? Or is it to be in more control, and looking to move from intermediate terrain to more difficult terrain?
Yeah.
So being able to, again, kind of tie their awareness back to a specific goal, I think is going to help us as coaches then drive what the learning is, because there's not a one size fits all for how to do this, and it's pros and cons of lots of checklists that we look at.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking too, like this is a perfect topic to kind of showcase skills coaching. I mean, this is why you need to go get a skills coach, because you can watch a YouTube video on like, oh, this is where you want to try and brake more, and this is where you want to try and brake less. But there's so many variables and so many nuances and so many different ways to edit the ratio of braking, more front, less rear, more rear, less front, or the timing and a banked corner, flat corner, tight radius, open radius. There's just so many variables, and that's where the skills coach is going to work with you over time to not just give you feedback on what you're doing, because you can't really see, a lot of the time you can't really see or feel exactly what you're doing, and it's nice to have someone watch you, but that all those variables is exactly what a good skills coach will do, is they'll take you through kind of a logical progression, kind of isolate different variables one at a time, and basically make all the nuanced kind of quote unquote complicated stuff, basically just break it down and make it seem logical and simple. So it's a good advert. Sure. It's a good reminder for why, we do what we do, which is in-person skills coaching. Because you can't just get it off a quick napkin in a bar or a quick 2-minute YouTube video, right? There's so much to it.
Well, I think this echoes back to the first episode of this season, the coaching versus instruction. We're talking about coaching at this point, and often braking is approached as instruction. It's kind of a one-off. Here's how you brake. And the reality is that there's 15 lessons. Per session that you could get into, and that's why this is a lot. Effective braking and performance braking is something that's long term. And is going to require a lot of nuance.
Yeah, and in that, I like the way you say that, because it reminds me of like, we always say your stability, your position on the bike is a skill that's the most fundamental, but it's a skill that you'll constantly work on. even pros are working on it. And for me, braking is the other one for that, for sure. Like uh, uh, we're pretty good at braking. How long we've been riding mountain bikes? 30 years or whatever. Like we're pretty good. I can do a pretty decent stoppie if I want to, right? Like, and I've seen you do some pretty sick stoppies, but I could still get so much better at my braking points, braking harder and shorter distances, less skidding on steep terrain, trusting the front brake more, learning to ride on the front brake more in really steep technical terrain. I'm a little bit too on and off for it. So yeah, braking is like a never ending project, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially that front brake.
Yeah.
It's a it
Yeah.
very the nuance and the elusiveness of the bite point and and maintaining grip, especially on loose terrain. I'm remembering that steep trail we rode recently was very
Mm.
loose and
Yeah.
struggling
Yeah.
in the wet to maintain
Oh,
traction.
that. Yeah, that's yeah. Yeah, that was cool. That was sweet.
What are
Well,
some?
that you remember that trail we rode last year, like up behind my house, the really loose one.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Silas rode that like I rode it, and it was like what I can't remember if I did ride it. But
Overnight
Silas rode it and made it look really easy. But
overnight sensation.
yeah, yeah, and he had
The
that
shoot. Yeah,
that shoot, and it was so loose because it was like mid late summer. It was just so powdery and loose, and he rode it so well. But he had the front brake on probably the whole time, the
yeah.
whole way through that thing, right? Whereas I was a little bit too on off when I went over that drop. I was a little off, I think, and so I couldn't quite get it back. But anyway,
It was so loose.
yeah, crazy loose.
But that just to echo again back to performance factors, how much does effective braking and confidence as a mental skill, how much aligned are those two concepts?
Yeah,
That people say, trust your brakes, but then that the work that you have to do to actually make that happen is quite significant.
yeah. There has to be a lot of technical skill development for you to learn to trust your brakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah. And I think that, especially kids that are growing up with the amazing bikes that they have and
Yeah,
riding the amazing trails, they're able to develop those habits.
yeah.
Kind of they can back to the start, they can build their skill house quicker than than we
Mm.
can, and then expand it, to
Well,
their
and I
heart's content.
totally, and I think as a sidebar, a little bit, like I still find myself riding. This sort of sounds silly, but a little bit like riding like I'm riding in the 90s. Like, oh, there's a drop, like don't touch your front brake and lean back a little bit and be careful. But then I kind of forget that, like, no, I'm on a 2024 bike, and I can be on the front brake because the front tires have so much more grip. Like it's funny how subconsciously, I think for me at least, I still revert a little bit back to thinking it's gnarlier than it is, because I grew up for years and years and years trying to ride difficult stuff on horrible bikes. And so I think without meaning to, I kind of revert back to, oh, don't touch the brake over that drop. But really, I should be riding over that drop into that chute with the front brake on. Because a modern bike can handle that, and the geometry's there, and the grip's there, and the brake control's there. So so I think that's where kids that are growing up on bikes these days, or even adults coming into the sport these days, they're not fighting any of that, old school ingrained bad habits that might just crop up every now and then. I don't know if you relate to that, but that's a bit of a sidebar, maybe.
Yeah, I think anybody that has spent any time on V brakes
Yeah,
or
yeah,
let
exactly. Yeah,
alone cantilever brakes, it's
yeah.
kind of a squeeze and hope kind of situation, especially if it's
Yeah.
wet.
I swear
Yeah.
the brakes I had in my Rally Lizard would be like in the wet, I would squeeze them, and I they were so bad. Sometimes I felt like I started to accelerate when I put the brakes on because they were that bad. Because you would expect it to slow you down, but then it didn't
Right.
slow you down at all. So it kind of felt like you were starting to accelerate with the brakes on.
Right.
They were they were just ridiculous.
I remember, having to, if you're buying new V-brake pads, you had different color choices, based on the conditions.
Oh yeah,
Your red ones and
yeah,
blue ones, and
good
based
times.
on if it's going to be wet or is it going to be muddy or going to be
Yeah.
dry.
God, they were so crap. I'm so stoked on modern bikes. Um, cool. So how do we brake? What are some key things here to avoid this? If we go back to traction and avoiding the skidding, what are some sort of thoughts from you in terms of just how we brake, whether it's applying the lever, the force in the lever, or whether it's pressure on the bike, or where do you start with that?
I think really the logical starting point, I think, is understanding how to apply the brakes gradually from the beginning.
Hmm.
And so like thinking biomechanically, how your lever is set up, making sure that your anatomy of your hands is matching the brake that you're using so that you can effectively squeeze the brakes in a gradual way so that you can get the force to the stopping point that you desire as quickly as possible without turning it on and off. Like I think that's a kind of a logical starting point for just understanding the kind of the
Yeah,
how to brake.
I really like that you mentioned brake lever position because you could almost do a whole episode on just dialing in brake lever position. But Roxy Bike Coaching, check her out on YouTube. She has a really good video on brake lever position, and it does address one of the common things I see, which is people having the levers too steep, kind of the same angle as their forearm a little bit, and it often makes it a little too steep. And lever positioning is huge in terms of that, like you said, that anatomy and biomechanics and the control over your fingers. 2 millimeters, a few degrees, it makes a big difference. So spending time on your brake lever setup is huge. I can't understate that enough because it's key. But yeah, squeezing the brakes gradually, squeezing them consistently. Like I kind of I find that the hardest one when being pressured. If you're trying to brake quickly, or you're braking through a rough, steep section, and you're trying to sort of keep the braking power on and keep the brakes engaged, but as the terrain is changing, you're trying to avoid the skidding. So it's sort of that consistent braking power matched with a bit of an ability to adjust that power as the wheel gains or loses traction. So you've still got that brake applied, so you're controlling your speed or slowing down, but you're constantly adjusting things so that you're minimizing or avoiding the skidding. And that's easy. If you're on like a flat ground car park and you do an emergency stop, it's pretty easy to control. But if you're on a gradient and the gradient keeps changing and the surface keeps changing, all of a sudden those basic concepts actually become quite difficult. And I was just running an apprentice coach course the other day in Kimberley for GSMBC, and it was we just spent a little bit of time working on their kind of emergency stops. And these are all adults; they've been mountain biking for years, and the amount of practice they could all benefit from just doing some front brake drills in the driveway. Front brake only, get low, brace. The body position is such a big part of how we brake, like understanding how to connect with your bike so that you and the bike become one. So that when the bike slows down in an emergency stop or under hard braking, you're not that floppy jelly that sort of wobbles over to the handlebars and falls over the front of the bike. You're just one solid unit. And as long as your center of mass is basically behind the front tire contact patch, it's going to be very unlikely that you're going to rotate forward enough to go over the handlebars. So the idea is not to move back. That's a common myth, right? Like even that myth is still around, like heavy braking, move back. But there's a difference between moving back on the bike and just nudging the bike slightly forward underneath you. Like if I lower my heels and I get low and I kind of brace, the bike might move maybe 1 inch forward underneath me, maybe 2 inches. But essentially, and that just helps me go into a position of strength to brace against the handlebars, to brace against the pedals. So when the bike suddenly slows down, I can resist those forces and keep my body where I want it to be and not let it sort of get shoved forward over the handlebars. And it's that connecting with the bike that's key. And I want to keep my weight fairly centered. We always say like close to center when you're braking, because you want the pressure on the front wheel. So maybe, Kristian, if you talk about the next bit, the pressure piece, and why pressure on the tires is and how we achieve that through body position, why that's so important for braking.
I mean, that's what it's all about. So we're creating, anytime that we're on a gradient and we're braking, we're creating more force, more traction. And so to over force, we're skidding. Like if we're resisting too much, we're going to have a negative result there. And so maintaining that position, maintaining a more centered position relative to what your pitch is, and applying the brake is going to give us the control that we need through pressure management. And one of the things that I just want to go back for just a second. One of the things I think is difficult is for riders to understand the modulation piece. And you started to mention that. I want to kind of unpack that for just a second. That the management of how can once you are braking, how can you manage more pressure on the brake and less pressure, more braking or less braking based on what's happening. And one of the things that I think about with this is the connectedness piece. And what I like to connect here with riders is the connection of the sensation in your hands of braking with the sound of what your tires are doing.
I like that.
And so like those two pieces together can help build our awareness for what's actually happening, because we can kind of sense speed, but once we dial in, especially on rockier terrain, we can hear it.
Okay, so we just wanted to take a quick break to say thanks for listening. And if you're a rider or coach out there and you have an idea for a topic or future episode, feel free to let us know through the comments on our Instagram page @DonutsAndBikes. We're always happy to hear suggestions from our listeners on what we do or ways to make the podcast better. Thanks, team. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, I like that, because sometimes we talk about how the pressure into the brake lever can change, but the position of the lever doesn't necessarily change a little bit. And so, it obviously does change a tiny bit, but it's sort of a way to think about it in your head where you can control the power going into the brake. You can adjust that power going into the brake. And it's these sort of minuscule movements. And you can literally practice it just standing next to your bike or standing over your bike and just put the brakes on and notice the lever gets to some sort of position, and then just practice easing the squeeze or increasing the squeeze. And you'll notice that for sure the lever moves a tiny bit, but from a sort of kinesthetic point of view, like just what you're feeling, it really, that's where the difference is noted more. So I think when people think about adjusting the lever, they might visualize the lever going in and out, but really it's doing that a tiny bit, but really the main thing is you're just feeling the squeeze, the power in your squeeze is just changing, slightly lighter squeeze or a slightly stronger squeeze. And that's something you can definitely practice. Without even riding, just practice those kind of micro adjustments to the squeezing pressure, I guess, to put a label on it.
Yeah. Now back to your pressure question. Pressure and grip are so nicely correlated. As thinking about our stability in corners with that, we really kind of separate front and rear tire and front and rear pressure and what we're trying to achieve with that. And so often if we're trying to achieve more grip on that front wheel, we might be we might be braking harder on the front to get more grip on at the beginning of a turn if it's steeper, and
Mm.
then shifting the pressure a bit and biasing the rear wheel at the exit to get more grip on it for direction control as we accelerate out of the turn. And so we have
Yeah,
that ability to manage pressure fore aft so that we can achieve more effectively achieve what we're after.
yeah, totally. And I think for the listeners, like just really understanding the difference. Well, the importance of your position on the bike to create pressure on the tires, and if without the pressure on the tire the traction isn't high, and then the braking, that's where the braking disappears. So if you want to use the front brake and you want to maximize grip on the front wheel, you can't be moving your body back because you're just taking loads of weight and therefore pressure away from the front wheel, and then the front wheel won't have the grip to brake. And similar, similar idea there for the back wheel. Like we need to stay fairly centered so that there's plenty of weight on the back wheel. But I think the other thing to maybe sort of add in here to the conversation, which is important, is the two scenarios of braking. One is to brake to slow down and reduce speed, and or stop. So basically braking to slow down versus braking to not speed up. So in other words, kind of braking to maintain speed. And that's where things can really change in terms of your technique or which brake you prioritize. And, if you're braking to slow down quickly, you need more front brake, less rear brake. Because under hard braking, the front tire gets heavy, the back tire gets light. So you want more front brake and less rear brake. Otherwise, the back brake just skids. So braking to slow down, front brake heavy for sure, and assuming the trail has grip and the tire has grip. But then braking to not speed up, well, I don't need a ton of braking power. And so arguably I don't need the front brake at all. If it's a downhill berm, I can just lightly kind of drag the back brake through the berm, not because I want to slow down, but just because I want to stop that bike from accelerating away from me. I want to kind of maintain a stacked, strong center dish position through the berm. And we call it trail braking, but a little bit of that trail braking, just dragging the back brake through the turn. It's enough to just keep the bike underneath me and to maintain my speed. But it's not so much that it upsets the bike. It makes it harder to steer or harder to lean or anything like that. So I think going back to the myth a little bit, is sometimes the myths kind of creep in, or kind of old school ways of teaching braking creep in, because people aren't understanding what's the outcome that we want with our braking right now. And is it slowing down or is it just maintaining speed? And understanding those two things are very different is really important, because how you brake in those two scenarios is very different, because the outcomes are kind of completely different. And even the forces and the physics are very different. So yeah, braking to slow down versus braking to not speed up.
Yeah, I think that ties nicely back to the beginning and our goals and how those two outcomes are very, very different. And that's going to make our performance within the skill very different. And becoming more aware of that will help as a good starting point.
Yeah, like a classic scenario is like a tech trail. You're typically braking a fair bit into tight corners to slow down, because it's a tech trail, so there's probably not a berm, or there's not the same sort of machine built berm. And so you naturally have to slow down more for the corners. Or maybe there's a drop or a really rooty section or something, and I need to drop some speed. I need to slow down before this rough stuff. Whereas on like a flow trail, like we kind of mentioned before, there's a lot of the trail design where the whole idea is that it's a flow trail. So you don't necessarily need to slow down really hard, or maybe you need to slow down a little bit. So there might be a bit of, front and back braking. But a lot of the time on those flow trails, you can just more or less get away with just maintaining speed, a little bit of back brake, just so I don't speed up here, a little bit of back brake through the corner, just so I keep the bike underneath me here. You're just very gently touching that back brake. So people sometimes misconstrue, my back brake pads wear out quicker than my front brake pads. So I must prioritize or use my back brake more all the time. But they're not understanding the difference between how often do you have the brake on versus how hard do you squeeze it when it is on. So the front brake generally is used arguably less often, but when you use it, there's more power. Whereas the dragging brake, it's on all the time, and that sort of light pressure, but just it's on a lot with the back brake. That's what kills the brake pads. Creates a lot of heat with the dragging, and in terms of time, they're on way more than the front brake, even if the pressure's lighter. So yeah, understanding the difference between how often you have a brake on and the force that you put into a brake. So again, just understanding these nuances and how that really builds into your goals. What am I trying to do? And then now that I know that goal, how do I do it? What about the 210? I wouldn't mind just touching on that quickly.
Okay.
Because that's something that pops up.
Yeah. I think the 210 braking, really simply put, is entering a corner, but brakes on, part of the way through the berm, or the corner, it's rear brake only, and then at the exit, it's zero brakes.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of a simple concept, but encourage everyone to go, if you're not familiar with it, go give it some tries, because it's an interesting sensation.
Yeah, totally. And the nice thing I like about it is it's applicable to a lot of corners. It's applicable to especially berms, like downhill berms for sure. Is both brakes to slow down if you need before the corner. So there's always that caveat, because sometimes you don't necessarily need to slow down a ton. You're just managing some of the speed that you already have. But yeah, two brakes to slow down if you need, and then one. And once you start the corner, it's like one brake through the corner, and then every corner will have that natural point where the rider just feels, I can let it go. I can. And often that's around the apex where you might just let that back brake go. But in recent times, I've tweaked it because I feel like, especially with teaching kids, it can change, because they get a bit confused with the front and back brakes and what's two and what's one. It's like, is one like I keep the front brake on, or so I'll just say both back, none, both brakes, then the back brake, and then no brakes. And like you mentioned, like, the timing does change. It might be both brakes up to the apex, one brake in the back brake through the second half of the corner, and then no brakes on the exit, like a steep downhill corner. It might be that, or if it's a fairly flat gradient, both brakes before the corner, one brake into the first meter of the corner, and then no brakes through the rest of the corner, the apex and the exit. So the timing of the both back, none really depends on size, shape of the turn, the speed coming into it, the speed that you want coming out of it, because it depends on the exit of the trail. Like, you might want to come out of the corner fast because there's a jump after it, or you might want to come out of the corner slow because there's another tight turn and it goes into a steep rock roll or something. So the corner might be completely the same, but the exit might be completely different. So your intended outcome is completely different. But yeah, both back, none. It's really easy to remember, and it's something I think listeners can just take away and start thinking about straight away on their next ride. Is whatever the corner is, try and follow that little progression of both back, none, and see if it gives you that happy medium of controlling traction, controlling your speed, but also maintaining speed. Because ultimately, if you can maintain speed through corners, you're going to beat your friends, and that's always good. And B, it's more efficient. That's the flow state. That's where that cool feeling of doing a corner and being like, oh my God, that felt awesome. Anytime it felt awesome is because you maintain speed, and you're not having to pedal to get up to speed or pump madly or whatever it is. It's that feeling of, oh my God, I railed that corner. So braking is is one of the tools that we can do to hopefully get that rad feeling through the corners.
Awesome. Hey, I think you have a donut for us.
I do. Slightly different tactic this week. So
All right.
I've been, because we've been doing a bunch of episodes, so I can't eat this many donuts. It just would be irresponsible. But yeah, so I've actually been researching donut shops and kind of picking one that looks awesome. So there's this one, it's sort of near my friends in Bristol in the UK, called Catley's, and you can check them out on Instagram. It's Catley's_. But they do these lemon meringue donuts and these like strawberry rhubarb donuts. And I was just going through their Instagram account. I was like, next time I'm in the UK, I'm going to try and get to this place because it looks unreal, and it looks like they do really good coffee as well. But there is a lot of really good looking donuts on this place, and I'm getting very, very excited to get back to the UK. And it even looks like they have a creme brulee donut as well. Nutella donuts. This place looks like the bomb. So I haven't eaten there. I don't know, but in the interest of talking about donuts but not constantly eating donuts, I thought this might be a happy medium, is to start researching places. So any listeners in the UK, if you're in the Bristol area, go check out Catley's, because I have a pretty good eye for bakeries on Instagram. You know, I follow quite a few, and I can tell the rubbish ones from the good ones. And this Catley's place looks legit. There's even this ice cream looking cronut thing that looks like it's in a cup of coffee. Like, this place just looks like heaven. So,
I think rhubarb in a donut makes it pretty healthy.
Rhubarb custard makes it healthy. Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of donuts do have fruit in them, like strawberry donuts.
Yeah, I think rhubarb, though, is extra healthy.
Nutella donuts is nuts, and people say nuts are really good for you. So it's good, healthy eating.
Right on. Thanks, Paul. This was fun.
Thanks, buddy. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll do it again soon. All right, that brings us to the end of another episode of Donuts and Bikes. We hope this conversation elevated your understanding of breaking through corners from a rider's and/or coach's perspective. We'd like to think that riding bikes isn't rocket science. It's really more about the pros and cons rather than rights and wrongs. Please take care if you're using any of this information discussed in this episode, and you can find our full disclaimer at our website, the Mount Bike Coaching Podcast at buzzsprout.com. Stay safe, ride smart, coach smarter, and we'll see you next time.